Today we're going to talk about inputs. So it's a fairly narrow topic, so hopefully you're interested. We're going to kind of branch into like inputs, forms, but we'll keep it pretty broad in the narrow sense. It'll make sense. So first, let's look at a couple different companies. I chose the sign-up form. I always find it a very interesting form. And let's just kind of break this down for people who don't know kind of like what the different aspects of a form are. And I don't know who's going to know and who's not, so we'll just start from the top. So here we can see we've got like Amazon's create an account form. So one of the first things you have on form inputs is you have the label. So you have, it says, what is this thing? It's your name, it's your email, it's your password, it's your re-entered password. Then you have the actual input. This is where you put in content, and you submit it, and we're going to take it and do all sorts of fun stuff with it, and store it, process it. You've got a placeholder. This is what goes inside of the input, and when you start typing, it'll go away. It's great for examples like your name, John Doe, or your email is media@example.com. And then you have helper text. Helper text is great for like what Amazon is using it here for. Your password must be at least 6 characters. And then as always with any form, you have to have some sort of submit. So let's take a peek over at Walmart. It's going to be about the same thing. So you're going to see basically the same thing. It's labels, it's inputs, it's helper texts, it's submits buttons. And most forms are going to follow this pattern. If we come and we look at one of the steps of Netflix's sign-up process, you'll start to see it's a little bit different. Our placeholder and our label are the same thing now. So the field looks like this, where it says, hey, it's your password. And up top, the email field looks the same way, but when you click into it, it kind of slides up a little bit and allows you to type. It's kind of the Google material design style, if you've seen it. And then we'll see that one more time on jet.com, which is a Walmart property. Just looks nicer. And we'll see they do the same thing. Like your label and your placeholder are like the same thing in your input. They kind of move around, but then you get your helper text and your submit button. So that's just kind of like some examples of forms. I mean, you've all seen forms. That's kind of these just broken down for anybody who's never had that done. But the reason we're going to talk about forms is because they're very important. You really can't get any information from your user without them. If you want them to sign up, if you want them to log in, if you want them to order something, you've got to have some sort of form. So they're super important, and we can have a great experience on the front end. Like, here's our marketing site, here's how we sold to the user. Like, imagine if you're on Amazon and they sold you this great product and then you went to buy it, and the form experience for actually buying that was awful. You might bail out. Or you might leave with a bad taste in your mouth. It was great on the beginning, but you're not going to remember that next time you come back. You're going to remember it took me like 10 minutes to fill out all my info, or the form process didn't let me know like where I had errors. So they're super important and often overlooked. So that's why we're going to chat about them today. And we're going to talk about just how you can, in general, create a good form, good inputs that are accessible and easy to understand. Also, my goal, this should not be very long. If it's long, we've got a problem. So we're going to talk about labels first. A couple do and don'ts with labels. Very simple, but very important because they tell the user what that is. So your label is not helper text if we're looking at the top box. So like your label is not username, this is the email you signed up with, or password must be at least 6 characters. That's your label. That's just like, what is this form field? Super important if somebody was on a screen reader because it's going to read all of that off, and that should be a little bit further down. And also at the top one, you'll see a problem of that. That shouldn't be called username anyway. So that's just like bad label design. You'll see that places. If you've ever seen a form where it's like, enter your username, you're like, oh, I know my username, and then you find out, oh, it's actually my email. So just kind of an example there. Down here below, labels are not placeholders. So placeholders, you'll see in the second input right here, kind of hard to see on the projector, that once you start typing, they go away. So imagine you filled out a form, it's 10 inputs long. You're going through, and the only indication you have of what fields are what are placeholders. By the time you're done and you filled it all out, you'll only have context to go off of that that's what this field is. So I may have context where I can see my @humana.com email address, but I don't have actual confirmation that like, oh, this is my email address. Imagine if you had accidentally filled out your email where it asks for your name or vice versa. It could be very confusing when you're trying to fix that. And then down below we can see the correct way is you've got an independent label that stays and always identifies what that form So kind of breezing on with inputs and labels. I don't know, does anybody notice anything different with the labels here on this form? There you go. So they're all caps. So all caps can kind of cause a problem anywhere, but I think this is a good place to talk about it. There are going to be people using your site who have dyslexia in some form on whether they know it, but they're somewhere on the scale of whether it's like terrible or just very mild. There are going to be about 10% of people using your website that have some form of dyslexia. And capital letters for them can be very difficult. So as you're having these form fields, you've got a form that has 30 fields on it, and they're kind of all these one-word, two-word things. When they're all capital letters, it can be very hard to quickly glance through that form and say like, what is what? And it can be very confusing. And I think this illustrates it pretty well. It's crashing. Get a spinning wheel at that.
Well,
there we go.
What about you? Are there other things that we have to be mindful of? Dyslexia, like if it's all bold or italicized?
Yeah, so it's actually with, we can go on a little side tangent because that's a good one. For people with dyslexia, bold often actually helps a lot, but italicized and underlined is often unhelpful. So steer clear of those for sure if you can. So when looking at this, it kind of starts to make sense, is that when you've got lowercase letters, you have distinct word shape. And you can kind of see that when we take the outline of the words down here, is those words actually have shape to them when you're looking at them. While when you're looking at just all capitals where it's top and bottom or perfectly in line, the words don't have any shape. So you kind of don't have that subtle cue in the back of your mind that your eyes can use to pick out, like, is this the correct word? So if word was forward instead, up top it would have a nice little extra shape in the front, and it would kind of give you a hint, like, oh, this says forward or this says word. Like that shape is going to change as the words change. Oh, it's slowly catching up after. Yeah. How far ahead did it go? We got new laptops. Bear with me.
So powerful.
I know. Okay, so we'll talk about sizing since they brought us here. Be careful with uppercase and lowercase for sure, especially on forums. But I mean, even if you're looking at content body of your website, you want to be careful how much you're putting in all uppercase because that's going to make it hard for a lot of people to read. 10% of your audience potentially, and we optimize for a lot less than that.
Is it on the cloud anywhere?
No. Want to come look at this and I'll just chat. So we'll talk about sizing while they look at that. So when you're thinking about your form sizing, say you're on a mobile device, you've probably been there, and you're trying to tap through a form. And the form inputs or the buttons are very small, you're going to find that you're accidentally going to click the wrong thing. And especially for people who are older, one of our major target audience is people 65 and older. We want to be careful not to make things too small. And a form is a great area for that. Like, it's definitely good to give it lots of space. It's definitely good to give it lots of space. So you want to give them lots of space. So make the inputs big, make the text for those inputs big, and then kind of give them a good spacing around the inputs. So you don't want someone who's trying to click on email to accidentally click on name, and then their keyboard shifts up, the whole thing moves around. It can be very frustrating. And those small things are going to be things that people remember. Whether when you talk to them, they can say, oh, it felt jumpy. They don't know, but they'll definitely know, like, the experience here was mediocre. There we go. Thanks, Eric. Okay, so you can see an example of that right here. I made a form that's purposefully way too small on the left. People are going to have a hard time clicking through that. The font size is 12, it's not legible, and it's just really unusable. On the right, you can see we've made it a lot bigger, so we've given those inputs a lot of space. We've made the labels bigger, and we've given them space between them. So it's not just that you've got space here, but it's between the inputs. Make them a lot easier to click on, A good example of that is Jet.com. So I think they do a great job making their inputs really big. Of all the examples we had, they definitely have the biggest. But in terms of sizing, I've highlighted this here too, is with inputs, it can be helpful to size the inputs to the size of the content. So you know if you're going to enter a zip code, it's not going to be 20 characters long, it's going to be 5. So it's good to size the, 5. Yeah. So it's good to size that input down. That way they understand like, oh, like it's 800 pixels wide and I only enter 4 characters, 5 characters, that can be kind of confusing. So it's definitely good to size those appropriately where you can. If you've got state, for example, it'd be great to have it really small because it's 2 letters potentially. So we'll move on from here. I think Jet.com does a great job with this. We're going to look at some examples in a minute where they do a very bad job. So let's talk about focus. So say you're navigating through a form with your keyboard, like you're tabbing, you enter your name, you hit tab, you enter your email, you hit tab. You'll get this kind of blue box surrounding what you're on. And when I first started in web development, it was the hot thing was to remove that box. So you went through and you hit it because it looked ugly and your designers didn't like it, so you took it off. And you didn't do anything to replace it. And the problem is, then you tap through, you have no indication of which field you're on. And that's important for people who mainly just use a keyboard. People who either can't use a mouse, or they prefer not to, or they just love to tab through. I mean, even your power users who just want to tap through. It's important for them to be able to know which field that they're on. So the blue box is pretty good. It comes in all web browsers, it's very accessible, but often it doesn't fit with the design of the website. So there's a couple different things we can do. So you see, Amazon does something very similar, is that they just colored the box orange. And it's pretty simple. It's pretty easy to read, well, pretty easy to see and understand, and you know exactly where you're at, which is super important. You can see Walmart.com does something very similar. That's really blurry. So they leave the blue box on all of their buttons, and on their fields, they darken them up to a much darker black that's really easy to see. A good example of what's not an acceptable alternative is you've got gray borders and then like a subtle green change. So someone who has difficulty seeing contrast changes or is colorblind in certain spectrums is not going to see that. It's definitely not a good idea to have that subtle change where you take a 1 pixel border that's gray and instead you make it green. So Jet.com is actually guilty of this. And they're guilty of a lot more too. But they change it to this blue color, which this is blown up, but on my laptop you can't see it. You also can't shift tab to go back up. So if you know if you're tabbing through a form, you hit tab and it goes down, you can hold shift tab and you can go back up. You can't do that on their website. It gets stuck on the error, which is super disappointing. So you can see I've taken a little approach here that's a little different when I created a form. The colors of this projector are awful. So what happens when you go through and you tab through, it actually doesn't just highlight the input, it highlights the label and the input, the entire box section. So that can be a really good idea because it includes that label, which can be pretty important to draw focus. So it's like I'm highlighting the input and I'm including the label in that, so it's like I know this is my email, my address. And this is a trick that Humana.com does, which I quite like. Let's see if it'll go through again. When it gets down to the add person button at the bottom, it highlights it in a dash. So it kind of gives you that like, notice that you're over it, and if you hit space, it'll click on it. And you notice when I just hover over with my mouse, it does not have that color, that dash. It's only for keyboard users. So we'll kind of move on from here. But super important that your form is navigable with keyboards, and that it's very clear where you're at on the form. So this is a pretty short section, but let's talk about limiting typing on forms. I don't know if you've had this and it drives me crazy, and you may start to notice it if you've not noticed it yet, but you'll go to enter your address, and it's okay, I enter my street address, then I enter my city, state, and zip. But in reality, if you just asked for my zip code, you could have pulled my city and state. So now I just entered my city and my state, and you know my zip code, so you could auto-fill that in with that info. But you could have just asked for my zip code. So I think that's a great example of a place where it's like, well, let's make it easier for the user, a little bit more work on our end, but have them just enter zip code, it'll populate it for them. And like autocomplete on Google Maps is a great example. Like it's not gonna make me type in the whole thing before hitting enter, it's gonna show me my possible options, and I can arrow key down to them. It just limits my typing, it helps me if I don't know exactly what I'm typing. Like say you just moved and you know your zip code for some reason, not your city state, I guess that's unlikely. Yes, it's a good idea to limit typing. Anywhere you can do that and speed up the form is good. It also limits errors. Somebody enters a zip code and it's accidentally the wrong zip code. They're going to know that because the state's changed now. Well, if the zip code is the last thing and they mistype a letter or a number, it's going to be hard to see. So errors on forms are super important. And there's kind of two types of errors on forms. There's a front-end validation error. So that's, say, you have an email field and instead you typed in your name. And it's pretty easy for us to say, well, that's not an email. Why don't, before we send that back to the server, have you fix that? And then there's back-end validation errors, where it's like that username or password already exists, or that's not a valid zip code, stuff like that. So as many errors as you can catch on the front side of this, the better, because you don't have to do that round trip for the server. It doesn't take time. Better for your users. And if you're going to do that, I highly recommend, if you're a web developer, HTML5 Validation, because it provides a couple nice accessibility things to us. One of my favorite is you're going to see me fill out this form, and I'm skipping email address, and I'm going to hit enter, and it auto-directs me back into email address. So if you're on a form and someone has submitted it, you should take them to where the error is so they can fix it. And then you'll see also HTML5 error validation. As I start typing, we'll say, oh, this is not an email address. So you'll see me as I start typing, oh, please enter an email address. Got it. So even if you're not going to use HTML5 error validation, you should always try to take the user on the form to where the error was. So you've got a form that's 30 inputs long, you have an error at the very top, don't just say error at the bottom and then highlight that field at the very top. Just go ahead and take their cursor to where it needs to be, or their cursor. And then when they hit enter again, if there's another error, just jump them down to that next error. So if I had email here and address was required and I didn't fill it out, it would take me to email first, I would fix that. Then when I hit enter or I hit submit again, it would say, oh, you've got an error with address. Let's go ahead and take you there. So anytime you can point your users to where your error is, it's a great idea. Yes?
There's one thing, is this all HTML5?
Yeah.
And one thing that I dislike about this form is while I'm trying to enter my email,
It's trying to type again.
An error
Yep.
message. It's not giving me the opportunity yet
Yes.
to complete. And you see that on multiple forms
Yes.
where they don't let you exit before they begin to pop up error messages.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pretty difficult problem to solve, as you can tell by how many people have it. I actually thought you were going to say how the HTML5 validation looks. It actually looks different in every browser, which is definitely a problem. But yes, there are ways around that to fix that. It just can be a little complicated. Chris makes a good point. You can see it here. As I start typing, it's like, oh, no. It's an email, so that could be confusing to people. So next, we'll talk about styling. I think this is maybe the most opinionated part of this. The other stuff you can look up, you can agree with. Chris has a very, very good point. Or you can disagree with it if you want. But styling is pretty opinionated. And I'm going to kind of put material design under a little spotlight here. So if anybody remembers the old material design forms, these aren't perfectly accurate, but it's like you've got your name, and then you've got an underline. And when you click on it, that name label slides up, and the underline stays there, and your field's typed there. I'm sure you use applications every single day that have that. I mean, at Humana, we have a lot of that still. But they're fairly inaccessible. So I don't know where the target area is on here that I can click. Is it above the label? How far up does it go? And it's just a line. A line doesn't really tell me that I'm supposed to type anything here. It's not a box. So Google kind of acknowledged this, and they got rid of these about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. But a lot of people are still stuck on these just because they've got component libraries that use them, or it's hard to migrate away from them. But Google definitely went away from these. So in the newer material design, or newer than that, it's still 1.5 years old. And you can't really see this one on the left here on the projector, which is a little bit of my complaint with the one on the left, is it relies on contrast of color. So there's a slight gray background on these, which is darker on nicer screens, but it kind of draws that box. It lets you know, here's where you can click anywhere in here, here's where your input actually is, and it kind of distinguishes it as an input. We're kind of used to boxes. I prefer the one on the left. So it's a nice box. The border, when you're in the field, it's nice, it's bold, it's blue, you can tell like, okay, I'm active on this one. But I still have a couple complaints with these. Is that I think on these forms, and they use these inputs, we're confusing placeholder text and label, which I think is not good. So placeholder text can be pretty important for giving you confidence as to what you're typing in. You have something that says full name and you have the word John Doe below it as the placeholder text. So it kind of gives you confidence that, okay, I'm going to be typing my full name. Where if at a glance you may have just seen name, or full may have looked like first, so you just start typing your first name. Same thing with email, dates, and so on. That placeholder gives you a lot of confidence. But here you don't have the option for a placeholder because your placeholder has now become your label. So this label right here would be a placeholder on any other form, but it actually slides up and turns into your label when you click on it. So you've got a couple options, is that say you do want a placeholder, you could put it below the form. So you could say like example, John Doe. And that's where your helper text goes a lot of the time. So what happens when you need helper text? Do you include it in that, put it below that? And your inputs kind of grow pretty tall and they have a lot of information around them. Another problem with these is if anybody has implementing these and actually programming these is pretty difficult. So a popular library, Pewdify, which a lot of us probably use, has these implemented. They have some problems in Internet Explorer, but it's also around 8,000 lines of code for these inputs, including CSS and generated with JavaScript. But it's a lot, 8,000 lines of code for an input that the browser supports natively, just to get the little label that floats up, is a lot. And you can do it a lot less. You can do it in 500, 600, 700, but that's still a lot. And if you do test-driven development, I mean, just double that, because you've got a test file for this. So you've got a lot that can go wrong. So kind of the analogy I've been using is like you're in a rocket ship, and like the rocket ship is the rocket ship. But a lot of times we turn inputs into like mini rocket ships inside of the rocket ship, which I think is what a lot of the material design inputs are. It's like you want to reach up and grab a knob that turns the light on and off, but instead you've reached up and there's a whole other rocket ship there. And it has all these things that can go wrong and all these bugs. They're difficult to maintain. And it can be a lot of man hours to build them and maintain them. So that's kind of my, I think, the most opinionated part of my talk, because I know a lot of people like the material design inputs. I mean, Google uses them, Target uses them, Netflix and Jet.com use them. So there's a lot of companies out there who are doing a great job and running great businesses that are using them. So yeah, you can take your lead that way. But I don't have any more to say. Does anybody have any questions about inputs or forms?
Okay.
Yes.
So you talked about the all caps and how that can be difficult. Is there something to be said about like fonts that can be easier to read and then maybe character?
Absolutely. There's a ton of studies out there that list like fonts that are easy to read. I don't remember them off the top of my head, so you can look them up. But like if you Google it, I mean, they're out there everywhere. People have written massive studies. So even the one that I pulled that graphic from had some recommended fonts. But your font choice definitely plays an impact on how people with dyslexia can interpret what you're trying to tell them. And some fonts are just easier to read than others. So even for people who don't have dyslexia. Yeah, definitely take that into account. Anybody else?
So you use forms obviously to gain information on your members, whoever's using your site. What process do you take visitors through, or what process do you go through to determine what you include on a certain form to be able to segment all that you need to do?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I mean, we could talk for days on this question. Because forms are often where you see the conversion rate drop off. So you've got 100 people that come into your site. On the back side of that sign-up form, you've got 5 who make it through. And that's a huge drop-off point for a lot of people. And we found that the more fields you add, the more people drop off. But very importantly, is if you have fields that are unrelated. So if you can group your unrelated fields together, so like this is my contact information, or this is my sign-in information, or this is my payment information, it feels a lot more manageable and people can handle that. So if you look at how Netflix goes through their flow, they have 3 steps and they group that information together, and that seems to be a lot more manageable for people. But for each step you have, you're going to see drop off. And it's kind of a balance you have to weigh, because you have, if you're trying to gain the highest conversion rate, you say, well, we want to have the least number of fields. But then you have your marketing department who's like, well, we need to reach out to these people, and we need to contact them, and we need to convert leads, and people convert that way as well. But to do that, you need more information besides just username and password. So it's kind of this balance of like, how do we balance the conversion that they will do versus the conversion on the site right now? And it's going to be different for every scenario. But I've definitely found that the step flow works. So if you have a 40 input form, try to take those 40 inputs, group them into a couple of different sections, and then display those one at a time. So just display your address, your payment, your whatever. So Compass or Viper now, Medicare enrollment tool that came out of the XC does that on the back of the sign-up flow. Is it's taken what must be 200 different points of data and it's grouped them together in an easy to understand way. Other benefits to that is that you can warn people earlier if there's a problem instead of waiting for them to fill all of it out. But yeah, it's going to vary just from team to team, and it's such a hard problem. So.
When someone puts data in that is incorrect for that field, do you have ideas on how to tell them what they did wrong or error messages like there's no percent and this equals 30%?
Yeah. So the question was when somebody enters data into form, are there ways to tell them what's wrong? So like, oh, you didn't add an ampersand or stuff like that. So maybe we used phone number, for example. Say you're entering phone number, and it's like the format we want it with dashes, for example. It would be best to autofill those dashes for them. So there's a lot of different methods, but phone number, say I'm typing my phone number and I go 111, it should automatically add a dash for me, 222-33333. You can do the same thing with date. So you can autocomplete, like where you can add slashes, or you can have a date picker. So for every type of input, it's going to vary a little bit. But normally what I prefer to do is just prevent those errors in the first place. So anytime you can stop those errors on the front end where people don't have to enter stuff in a formatted way like that, it's best. If not, normally an example of formatting helps. So say you're entering your like Medicare ID number. It's nice to have an example of formatting, especially if there's multiple formatting options, that have multiple options. And that I think will normally clear it up for people. You could also go as far as just saying, hey, you forgot an ampersand. So that's something you can build into the logic. It's like they submitted it, and we're checking, does it have an ampersand on the third character? If not, just let them know they don't have an ampersand. But I think it's definitely better to prevent those things on the front end. And then just take the ones that you can't prevent, add examples, and then maybe add checks last. Then warn them with that. Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
So, mine's more of a research more than a question.
Okay.
It's kind of recycled material that's been improved over the years. But one of the things that I always feel like is left out is interaction with the platform. And I feel like a lot of those plugins that you say Beautify or native HTML5 is falling apart with the new dark mode on the phone and on the browser. And then moving to the point where you can customize how everything looks now on every device and every browser. And a lot of these native or plugins are not working anymore. So do you have any solutions for that or anything that you have found or stumbled upon so far that works with that?
I don't. Yeah, I know. Like if you have Firefox on like your iOS device, you can go and turn on, like you can enable night mode, which flips the color palette and everything, but it looks awful. Like everything looks terrible. So some browsers now do have a flag. So like when Firefox, you flip it to night mode, there's a flag you can check in your JavaScript. It'll say whether night mode is enabled, so you can implement your own if you want. But besides that, I don't have too much of an opinion on that yet, or even thoughts. Jake?
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one is why focus on just inputs and not like radio button, checkbox, drop down? And the second question is how do you pick between radio buttons and drop downs?
We only have an hour. So I mean, we could talk about this forever, and I think a lot of the same principles apply, of just like making them easy to use, selectable, stuff like that. And how do you choose radio button versus drop down? I guess length. You know, that would be my first instinct. Do you have 10 items, or do you have 2?
Is there problems with accessibility with drop down versus?
Yeah, so I mean, if you use the built-in browser drop-downs, there's no problem at all, because the browser's done a great job with it. If you roll your own drop-down, you're going to have to do a lot of work to make them accessible. A lot of work. And I think Jake and I did some of that work on Compass. And drop-downs can be, custom drop-downs can be difficult to work with. But when you're in the browser, it's also very, very difficult to style the default dropdowns, if that's something that's important for your application. Anybody else?
Yeah, I appreciate your consideration in terms of like a design system and not being too stringent on, hey, this is our form style, you have to use it in every case where you're inputting information. Because I do think there's a variety of use cases. And the example where the label is used as the in text, might work great for when you're entering an email or a search box because it's a single field.
Yep.
Whereas if you have, a kind of a sequential form where you are adding information like you're filling information, then I think those labels become more important. So there's probably a variety of use cases to consider. So I just appreciate your perspective on there's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, I mean, Google.com does that. I mean, you're right, because it's just a single search input. It just says like search at the end, but there is no label. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things to consider that provide a lot of right options, and there's also a lot of wrong options. But there's also, I think part of the problem with forms is there's so much that you can do and that you need to do to make them work correctly, and we kind of like we push it to the back. Like we're all worried about like bringing people in, but we don't really worry about, okay, what happens when it's time to collect their data, sign them up, check them out, stuff like that. So I think there can be so many things to consider there that because it often gets pushed to the back burner, we don't get to consider all of those things and we end up with subpar forms. Yeah?
I have a follow-up question. I've noticed that you're using a lot of latest technology, which means that, for instance, you use HTML5, you cut off a lot of people who are still using older browsers.
Yeah.
Here in Banana, I know for a fact that a lot of our health community don't not update their software equipment. Another thing that I've used personally is like templates. I just had that in the top of my head. I forget what it's called, but components that are already pre-built, login screens, forms, and all sorts of stuff. And I've learned that if you go with the standard template, you can update it. You can automatically introduce backwards compatibility with this top features. But the moment you try to customize anything, it falls apart.
Yeah.
What in your experience, what has been the best sort of like out-of-the-box platform or plugin that works the best for the broader audience?
That's a challenging question to answer, and I don't know if I have an answer. Because I think it varies so much from product to product that I often find myself having a hard time using the same library. So I know a lot of people here like Beautify and have had good success with Beautify. I think it's a lot of code inside of Beautify for what it provides you. So yeah, that's also a hard question to answer. The first thing you said about modern technologies is, I guess the only modern technology that I used here on the forms that I built was HTML5, and that was just for the error validation. So that's one thing I think that with like material design inputs is you have to use a lot of modern technology to get them to work, which won't work on IE 10, IE 11. And I don't know how far back HTML5 goes. I know
I
we're...
struggle with Bootstrap. That's the option.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just like Bootstrap.
Yeah, I jumped on the bandwagon when it came out, and I was like, oh, this is great. But then later down the path of the lifecycle of my application, I realized that there's just so much there that's also not readable. Right?
Yeah.
And it's updating anything or changing anything is a nightmare.
Yeah, and a lot of it's just going to be personal preference for you and your team too. So like Justin, the guy I work with, we'll have minor debates about do we try to like turn our CSS into a like Bootstrap style thing or like group it together, and then I'm on the far spectrum where I'm like, oh, let's just write it all again. And so there's definitely good competition that can be had about deciding what to do, and it's really, I think, just going to be project to project basis. Like you might have Bootstrap works on one project, and a new project that doesn't support old routers or just use Beautify, but I doubt there's like a one hammer, like one nail solves all your problems kind of thing here. Anything else? Yeah.
Is Beautify supported by any IE browsers, not including Edge, but like actual IE browsers?
I don't know. Anybody know? Where's Tom? Maybe. I really don't know. My guess is they probably tried to go, Edge will be supported because Edge is a modern browser. My guess is they probably tried to go back to IE 11, but IE 11's been unsupported since by Microsoft for 2.5, 3 years now. So my guess is they did not go to IE 10. That's a guess. You can just look it up on the website. Okay. If nobody has more questions, count to like 5 or 10. Okay, thanks for coming.